Well, thank you everyone for being here today, especially to our speakers, but to all of you for taking the time to be here for this important conversation. I'm going to give a little introduction to Giving Women, and then we're going to launch right in. We have a very esteemed group of people who are speaking to us today and sharing their views. But we also want to hear from you, and I think the most important thing to say is about Giving Women. So Giving Women is a community. It's a network of women philanthropists, so women who want to give their time. We call ourselves action philanthropists. We're people who want to give their time and their expertise to support the cause of women and girls in need. And we see very much as our role within the philanthropic ecosystem to actually to convene people together to have important conversations, and particularly in times like these, but always. And so one of our strengths is actually bringing together actors from grassroots to NGOs, civil society, international NGOs, UN organizations, academia, etc., private sector to have important conversations. That's not all we do. We also, and most importantly, support projects for women and girls. And so we select projects with our members and provide support to them, often through just a listening ear, and sometimes through very technical support that we provide. So yes, if you like what you're seeing here and you want to be part of this community, please do join in and participate. I think the motivation for this conversation today was actually came from our community of projects that we support. As soon as the USAID freeze was announced, we had conversations with our partners, as we do all the time, which informed us that there was real important changes happening on the ground. There was organizations who were faced with very, very difficult decisions, and also seeing some things that were very difficult to see and felt very disempowered in the situation. And so we felt that it was our responsibility to come together and to bring together a group of people to have a conversation, not so much to talk about what's going on, because I think we will be talking about that today as well, but really to look forward and to try and see how we can imagine something different, how we can look forward and really turn, as my father always says, turn adversity into opportunity. And I think, the name of this conference of this conversation was the USAID freeze. Of course, now we know, and I think we've known for some time, it's not a freeze. It's an end. It's an end of a lot of funding. I think it was announced recently that 5,800 awards will be terminated, and that's a lot of jobs. That's a lot of capital that has been that people are depending on to save lives, to maintain systems. And I think, in this time, we kind of look back and we say, okay, how did we get here? And, where do we go from here? And I've been sort of mulling these questions over myself. And I think when John F. Kennedy started USAID in 1961, the mission was about national security, but it was also a moral obligation to help the poor. And I think many of us here today on the call have actually joined that mission and have dedicated our lives to trying to support civil society organizations, to support and to really try motivated and driven by the challenges and the needs that we see around us and beyond, and that we read about, to try and make a difference in the world. And today this is a humongous industry, and this industry has just suffered probably one of its biggest blows ever, and so it calls us to ask the question, what are we doing, and how can we save what needs to be saved, and how can we make sure that what we're doing actually is going to change lives? And as I was preparing for this conversation, and as I represent, hi, I'm Elianna Sabbag. I didn't introduce myself, and I work for a foundation, and so I'm also representing the donor perspective. And I think as a a philanthropist or as a, representing a donor organization, the questions we're asking ourselves is like, what can we do in this really complex situation? And I think, the Doge team has definitely turned off the tap, and many bilateral donors are following suit. So we've seen it's been happening over some time, but it's really pretty systematic now. The French, the Dutch, there are many. The Swiss, the Germans are limiting the bilateral funding that they are providing substantially, turning a lot more to military. So the question of like where do we go from here is an important one, and I think what I'm struck by, and the reason why we wanted to focus on health in particular here, is that when we look at what's working in the system right now and the successes we've had in development, it's actually the successes have been particularly in health and in the humanitarian sector. We've saved a lot of lives. We've slashed deaths of HIV in half. There's really substantial positive things that are happening, and so at this point, we have to sort of ask the question: how do we save what's working, and how do we reposition ourselves as well to enable what needs to go, and what needs to come. So you're not here to listen to me talk and ramble on. But so I'm going to pass it over to my amazing panelists. We are going to hear from two organizations who are working on the ground, and who will share with us what they're seeing, what they're experiencing, and also their vision. And when we have some others who are from academia and who have been with U.S. government as well to tell us about what their vision is for the future as well. So before we move on, I wanted to sort of get a feel of the room and see who do we have here, and I'm going to also obviously open up for conversation and questions towards the end. And so it'll be interesting to hear from you, what your insights are, what your questions are. So that would be really useful. So this is really interesting. We have probably the highest proportion of NGOs, some civil society organizations, INGOs, of course, some foundations, and some multilateral donors, and some philanthropists, and a few others, of course. Thank you all for being here. So here we go. I'm going to start this conversation with Heba, and I'm going to ask you first, Heba, to please. I'm not going to do general introductions. I think you guys all saw the invitation and everyone's LinkedIn profiles, et cetera. So first of all, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and please explain to our listeners a little bit of the history of bilateral aid and development, and in my personal opinion, how it was built to fail. But I think you might take difference with that. Thanks.
Sure.
Heba.
Hi, everyone. My name is Heba. I used to be a journalist covering humanitarian crises, and am now facilitating a series of dialogues organized by the think tank ODI Global with major government donors to try to reimagine development cooperation. So we've been having a number of conversations with the likes of many of those that you mentioned, Elianna, that are now cutting their aid budgets to kind of understand how their ministries are thinking about this and where this industry or endeavor might go moving forward. The aid, as we know it, is officially called the Official Development Assistance, ODA. And it was created in the 1960s as a way of helping countries develop, specifically focused on poverty reduction, and some would argue to help rich countries have markets with which they could better trade because they would be more economically viable. But over the years and decades, I think it has the traditional rationale behind aid has come to be challenged for a number of reasons. So I don't know if I would say it was built to fail, but it's increasingly facing a crisis of legitimacy. And I think there's a strong argument that it's no longer the right framework for the world we live in. So there's a few reasons for that. One, we no longer live in a world where there's a clear north and a clear south. That has disappeared with the rise of emerging powers. Low income countries are increasingly providing capital. The kind of delineation of rich and poor doesn't make sense anymore. Second, aid isn't actually going to those most in need. I think there was once a time in which you could really argue that this was helping the most marginalized in the world. But today, at least when it comes to official development assistance, a lot of it is flowing to upper middle income countries or lower middle income countries rather than the least developed countries. So we're seeing, for example, and this is obviously exceptional, but it does, I think, reflect the point. Ukraine received as much in aid in 2023 as 59% of all of Africa. So, the discrepancy there is massive. Now we're seeing aid dollars being increasingly spent within donor countries on supporting refugees. And so the crises where people might be most in need are not the ones that are receiving aid, which has also raised a bunch of questions around how effective aid is. We're seeing that after years and years of aid in many countries, actually, they continue to be in need. And so we're not seeing countries actually graduating in the way it was originally intended out of poverty and into sustainability and resilience. We're seeing aid being used often for national interests, and that's increasingly the case in this really geopolitically polarized world. We're also seeing the rise of inequality in developed countries, which is leading to this wave of far-right governments that are more interested domestically rather than internationally, and development policy is increasingly under attack, as we've seen. And I think somebody put it one way once that really struck me, that if this was a business, it doesn't have shareholders anymore. Then you add on top of that the longstanding critique that there's a lack of ownership at the local level of international aid, calls for reparations. And so you end up in a situation where there's a lack of trust in both directions, both between kind of the recipients of aid and the donors, but also between the aid sector and the publics that fund it. And so it's now reached a point where the whole apparatus is in question. And then the last thing I'll say, I suppose, is that it's being pulled in all kinds of directions now, where you have international aid being used both for its kind of traditional historical purpose of poverty reduction, but also to fight climate change and pandemics, and also to tackle increasing humanitarian crises. And there's just not enough money to go around for all the need, especially right now with what we're seeing in terms of cuts. So all of this has led to some real deep soul searching among donors, even those that you see in the news that seem to be cutting willy-nilly, are asking themselves a lot of questions on the inside for all of these reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Heba. Yes, I think the evidence is pretty pretty dark in terms of like how much progress we've made with the amount of money we have spent, and I think that's actually probably the harshest reality to face right now, to see the rising inequality and the continuing and rising challenges. But certainly the system had certain functions, and today, without the capital that the US used to put into it, we have a lot of systems that are actually failing. I'm gonna go to Nidhi right now, and I'm gonna ask you, Nidhi, you used to work at USAID as the Deputy Assistant Administrator. Can you explain what your role was, and why you left USAID when you did, and what would you say is normal about this transition to the new government, and what not? And so what is surprising in this federal review for you? Thank you.
Thanks, Elianna, and thanks all for joining. I most recently was the Deputy Assistant Administrator for Global Health at USAID. I previously was career staff in USAID on the humanitarian side and did work under the first Trump administration, and under the Biden administration, switched to political appointments. So I oversaw the global health and global development portfolios at the White House, and then returned to USAID on the global health side. So my departure was planned with the transition as political appointees leave when the president departs. It is not unusual that any administration would do a review, whether it's of foreign assistance, even domestic assistance, a range of programs. What is not normal, and what is deeply problematic, is how this administration has gone about the reconsideration of foreign assistance, specifically the sequencing of actions that they have undertaken and facilitated does not and has not facilitated the ability for aid to continue in an uninterrupted fashion, and in a way that minimizes harm. The administration had first announced a freeze on foreign assistance, then after that announced that there would be a review of foreign assistance. Then after that announced waivers that actually were then revised further. And in parallel, DOGE, which is I'm sure many people have heard of, took over the payment system within USAID as well as the HR systems and began terminating staff. And what we saw very quickly unfold was just complete chaos, because typically what would happen is you would have a review announced with waivers announced at the start. So it would be very clear what types of programs would either not be under review, or that you would complete a review, freeze certain efforts, but have things in place to exempt certain things. That sequencing didn't happen. And then the infrastructure within USAID did not exist to actually enable anything as it was announced. So the speed and slashing of the agency has completely crippled any ability to, within the agency, for staff, whether based overseas as part of U.S. Embassies or in Washington at their headquarters, to get guidance or clarity in terms of what's in or what's out. There's been a rapid erosion of technical capacity across USAID and its overall operational capacity, which we know has had an immediate parallel effect with partner organizations that received funding from USAID. And just to give you some context, USAID in the last few years averaged about a $40 billion agency, about 10 billion of that for global health, 10 billion or so for humanitarian assistance. So those two areas really making up the majority of what the agency does. And the Global Health Bureau, which I help lead, had 900 people in Washington, about 1,600 overseas. And as of today, there are 67 people left in headquarters from what was 900 6 weeks ago. And at the end of April, that will go down to 52 people, given what we are tracking in terms of terminations. So looking just at that as a snapshot of what is happening throughout the entire agency, you are completely taking out capacity, which is not possible to very quickly restore, of course. In parallel to that, we have seen a pretty significant, I would say, and continuous wave of misinformation, and then the ripple effect of misperceptions of U.S. foreign aid. A lot of people in the U.S., when polled, think that the U.S. government spends about a quarter of its budget on foreign assistance, and that's not true. It's under 1%. I think there are very valid questions around the efficacy and the efficiency of spending, and that's a constant question that I think every administration needs to be asking. And the reality is when you provide foreign assistance as part of a government, there is a natural tie to foreign policy interests, and so that may change through different administrations. But with the way that this has happened, it has challenged both the acute near term in creating and presenting a range of problems that were probably avoidable, meaning that, I mean, this I think has been irresponsible and dangerous because people are paying the price. There is no glide path for programs. And what that has meant, we've already seen that people are dying, that people are being denied care. We have seen that partner organizations, just like USAID, is terminating their staff and having significant ramifications. And unlike governments like the UK or Australia, who went through processes of reevaluating, merging their foreign assistance platforms, this was done in a way that doesn't provide that same glide path or notice, which is important because that means that the system, the surrounding system, can't plan. Everyone just had the rug ripped out from them. And In parallel, I would say the other challenges is the US has completely yielded space to actors like the PRC, the People's Republic of China, who do not share necessarily the same interest in providing quality and equitable services to people. There are a range of different issues that are created. And then here in Washington, D.C., what we are seeing is the challenge of how to create and sustain energy to keep any kind of appropriation for foreign assistance that will allow some future return, even though knowing it will look different. But all of that to say is the scramble of how this has all unfolded with this mix of near-term issues, midterm issues, long-term issues, and with the effects that has happened. There are so many things that I think could and should be talked about, but it begs a lot of questions around, we're at a moment where we have to think of what should the system actually look like, and how do we actually preserve things that very acutely people's lives depend on, and minimize the hits to those programs in the best way possible. And there's a lot of discussion on bridge funding, which I know we'll get more into, but I would just say that, again, with the way that the US government has gone about these last few weeks, any decisions or recommendations even for how bridge funding is done has to take into account these immediate near-term effects, and not wanting to actually repeat the same issue later if we don't create funding pathways that actually have some sustainability. Because what could happen is that we then have a different set of resources that somewhat compensates for the gap that the US government has now left, but put the same set of issues on the table at a later date for partners when that set of funding gets eroded.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Nidhi. That's so helpful to have that broad vision of the system, and how the way that this administration has come into it to do its review has been so damaging. And what you didn't mention, and I think most people probably are aware of, but the waivers that they put forth and the way that they did that, the system wasn't actually able to pay out for the waivers because the payment system was not working anymore, and there was actually no way to authorize them. So even if there was a good intention there in creating the waivers, it was actually not possible to actually implement it. Mo, I was going to come to you next, but I feel like we need to go to the field right now. So I'm actually going to jump and I'm going to come back to you, okay? So I would like to address my next question to Felix. I'd like you to introduce yourself and share with the audience what you do and why you do it, and how this funding freeze has affected your work, and what you're seeing on the ground where you are.
Certainly, and thank you so much for this opportunity. Good morning, good evening, everyone. So my name is Felix Brooks-Church. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a social enterprise called Sanku. We work throughout East Africa, in Tanzania, Kenya, and Ethiopia. We're about 10 years old. And what we do is very specific. We literally have built machines and mechanisms and business models to get nutrients into people. And we use food as a vehicle. And we enable local food processors throughout the East African region. And so we produce fortified flour, life-saving fortified flour for the general population, but also targeted programs like school feeding, refugees, informal settlements. And so that's what we do. And so I've just gotten back from 3 weeks of work in the field in all 3 countries. And part of my time there is obviously my day job running these social enterprises, but I spent this time also cognitive of what's going on to get a real sense of how is this impacting the last mile. And we talk about, the potential thousands, millions of people that would be affected. And we got to remember those numbers represent people and real stories. And so I wanted to come face to face and hear those voices. And report back, and I have the privilege to sit here and report back for so many people. And before I get into that, I have firsthand experience, as far as being impacted by this freeze. And as you rightly said, it's no longer a freeze. It's time to accept it's over. And so, our entry recently into Ethiopia to launch our organization there a couple months ago was contingent on USAID funding. It was a promise. There was pen on paper. It was about $800,000, and they were going to pay us once we started. So we hired staff, about 7 staff, opened up a warehouse, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to register, bought hundreds of thousands of dollars of these machines that actually add the nutrients, life-saving nutrients. And then 3 weeks ago, we got the letter. Sorry, done. And so we were faced, I think, like many grassroots or local NGOs or local social enterprises with the choice. We either pull back and not continue in Ethiopia, or we press forward. And I think for all of us, our work is obviously very important. But when it comes to food and especially nutrition and what we do, it's urgently critical. We couldn't pull back. Responsibly, we could not pull back. We had to move forward. Ethiopia is a country where 740 kids die every single day from malnutrition. And so we had to find the money from somewhere. And so I, got on the phone, emails, blah, blah, and luckily donors are coming through to fill those gaps slowly but surely. It will come back in. So I just wanted to share that as far as how I was personally, or the organization was hit. But as I was going through the last 3 weeks across Kenya and in the field in Tanzania and Ethiopia, where I work the most recently, I asked, show me the evidence of the freeze, of the shutdown. And there were warehouses padlocked, full of food, emergency food, full of HIV medication, full of vaccines, full of seed, tractors, just locked. And they can't touch it because it was paid for by USAID for future projects that have been frozen, and all the staff are now at home and out of a job. And it's heartbreaking because in those communities are people that desperately need those doors to open. And it was just, I felt like getting a padlock cutter or whatever, and like literally breaking down those doors and saying, go get this stuff. But that was just me, 3 weeks, one person seeing that. And so imagine how much, or to what extent, that is happening and evident, and how many people and lives are impacted. So it's real, and it's at the last mile, unfortunately.
Thank you so much, Felix, for sharing your story and what you've been seeing. Yeah, it's definitely brings it to life, and makes us understand better the real consequences on the ground. I'm going to turn to Mercy now, and I'd like to ask you, so Mercy is one of Giving Women Projects. Felix was actually a speaker on one of our panels in our annual conference. That's how we got to know Felix. And Mercy is one of our projects, the Giving Women Project. So we've worked with Mercy over quite some time to support her organization in India. Mercy, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Blossom Trust, who it is that you serve, and how this foreign aid freeze has affected your organization? I'd like to hear really about what you're struggling with, and hopefully on this call we're going to find also some solutions to support you.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for this very good opportunity, which gives us a very good exposure to share our feelings, to share our problems with you all, but without losing hope. So myself, Mercy Anapoorani, the director of Blossom Trust, a local NGO formed some 30 years ago. Some years ago, our NGO was about to sink without funds and without know how to go about. Even we didn't have a website. I remember at that time, Giving Women was through that project, we were able to establish ourselves more confidently, and we were working at the grassroots level only. And our main aim is to work for women and children, because it is led by women and it is for women. At the same time, we were able to give attention to the patients, especially the HIV patients, TB patients. And in all our work, we prioritize women at the top, because they are the real victims, they are the real sufferers. I think it's all over the world. There is no difference between North and South in this aspect. So Blossom Trust, we work, first aim is to give economic independence for the women, and also the health, which is very basic, necessary for the women, which we don't concentrate at all. And the third one is to achieve the female human rights by getting respect from the family and from the society. So these were the three goals with which we continue to work. And since most of the NGOs, local NGOs working at the grassroots level depend upon projects to support ourselves, the staff, the community, the whole processes, we totally has to depend upon the projects. And Blossom was working for the past 30 years among the HIV, in the HIV field, tuberculosis. Right now, we were working for the TB patients for prevention, care and support, and also community level monitoring. We were involved in this process only. To know more about our work, you can visit our website, blossomtrust.org. So 30 years, a long span of time we have worked. So a lot of things we have done, all focused towards women and children. Now, when it comes to this particular issue, which has affected us a lot, because for the past 1 year, from November, we had started working with FIFA, directly funded by the USAID, which is a small grant only, $1 million per year. And of course, we were working with Stop TB Geneva. Stop TB Geneva gets funds from USAID. So we were working among the TB patients to help them adhere to the treatment, to do community level monitoring. So it's all direct services what our women do. And most of the women staff are women only. When this particular, as now our brother shared, we were planning on January 28th, I think so. We were conducting our review meeting and we are planning for the next month. No one knows, no one really expected this sudden blow, which we really shattered our life. And 48 poor rural women, outreach workers, lost their job. And their salary was just $100 to $120 per month. This is the salary they were receiving. And they were doing a lot of work, saving so much of lives. Now, all these TB patients' lives are at risk. They say 11,000 TB patients all over the world are at risk. So people are going to die out of, because of TB, HIV, malaria. These are the three main diseases, I think, which has the funding. USAID supports all three these projects through Global Fund also. And we are working among the transgender, which we are expecting at any time, any news or any email may come at any time. And they are all really very worried. And of course, these women who lost their jobs, one thing what we saw is a sudden blow, because we had our contract till June 2025, and we were receiving the salary before January, and we have done the work. Our women have done the work all throughout the month. They have door to door, they have gone to the doors to the every TB patient, and then provided nutrition. Everything has been spent, expecting that the money will come on the end of January, but nothing. Our women could not, without salaries, they could not do anything. No money to pay the rent, no money to pay the groceries. Here we have the system, not system, it's a habit. We get everything in credit. Only after getting the salary, it will be all paid.
Thank you.
It will all be settled. But this has stopped. So no chance of it. This has affected us a lot, and but we have not lost confidence. But not only in India, everywhere in Africa, everywhere, it is affected a lot. That is my humble points, what I want to
Thank you so much, Mercy.
share with you all.
I think you
Thank
bring
you.
us you bring us to a really important reflection, I think, about the people who are working on the ground on very, very small salaries who really, really depend. I think, I mentioned at the beginning that this is an industry. People are engaged in this enormous machine, which is an industry, and there are a lot of jobs that have been lost. But those who lose their jobs of $120 a month and have worked that month and lost and not making that $120, that's significant. And I think also the important work of your organization, I think, and yours and so many like yours, civil society organizations working on the ground, doing the monitoring, doing the bringing people to get their treatment, the life-saving work that your organization is doing is critical, and our global community relies and depends on it. And so I want to first thank you for your work and for your commitment to staying engaged in doing the work. And I hope that we're going to find some good solutions for you throughout this conversation. But thank you so much for sharing. So Mo, without further ado, I'm coming to you, so you're the assistant professor of public health at the California State University, Fullerton. Can you talk to us about the importance of academic research for global public health today? And so how do you fit into the humanitarian and development landscape? And how have the decisions coming out of Washington affected your work? What are you losing? What's at stake here? Thank you so much for being with us. And yeah.
Thank you so much, and thank you to my co-panelists. But do we have like 5 days so I can answer all the things? That would be amazing.
Approximately 5 days.
Trying to, in a nutshell, let me start personal. As someone who's funded at the federal level, there's words that I'm not allowed to say when I'm publishing research now. I've been censored for the first time in my life as an American. It's a very odd place to know that I cannot use the word woman in my research, or female, or any derivative thereof. I am not allowed to use the word, any words actually, of research that I do: discrimination, racism, injustice, gender, equity. I can't even identify particular people: Asian, African American, Hispanic. Students on campuses have been barred from any kind of political activism, threatened by voicing their right to free speech, to advocate on behalf of those who are suffering around the world. These are not just technical questions. These are not just questions of funding. These are fundamental existential questions. And I think, as a health researcher, I think what I really want to impress upon your audience today, wonderful people who have joined us, is we have to understand what system we keep discussing. In my work in health, in health science, I teach students that health is much more than an absence of disease and injury. We have to understand not just the downstream effects on our health and well-being: lack of food, lack of water, and safe sanitation, all of the downstream effects. But we need to think about those upstream effects. Why do we have this lack of food? Why is there inequitable access to safe drinking water? Why is there poor air pollution in the world? What is the system that we are discussing? And as someone who studies pandemics in history, I want to argue that talking about this system is the Westphalian system. It started in 1648, after the bubonic plague in the 14th century enabled its rise, which put nation states, sovereignty, as the only value that was respected in this global system. It gives impunity to nation states. And as my colleagues have argued, North and South conversation doesn't matter. We are a global planet, one planetary home. If this system of empire has forced a rupture where we are discussing its demise, let it fall. It was never designed for health and justice, but history puts us on the trajectory of justice. So while this system is falling and we're all exacerbated by its fall and we're all impacted by it, let us come together as a human society to figure out what system do we want to build, as my colleague said. We have to do this thoughtfully, deliberatively, as Arundhati Roy talks about. This system was rotten from the beginning, as Isabel Wilkerson talks about in her book, Caste. It was rotten. Let's not try to stop its bleeding so that it survives. Let's create a new system for it to survive. Fundamentally, global health is about recognizing both the natural, physical sciences as well as the social sciences. We have to address the acute pressures on our society with bridge funding and all the technical ways and all the wonderful people that are here to assist, while at the same time addressing the root causes of injustice and inequity. That's how I treat my students. So let's think about our planet as the way that we move forward. Let's understand that this is an ethical issue to recognize the interdependence and the dignity of all human life. And no longer can we create some kind of weird social hierarchy where certain people of certain genders, I can't even say these words, are at the top and everybody else is at the bottom. That doesn't make sense. This was socially constructed for power and control. Let's get rid of it and recognize the fundamental oneness of humanity on our planet. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you've said it beautifully, Mo, and we're so grateful for you being here. I think, recognizing the ethical issue to recognize the injustice, the dependence that we've created within the system. I think the system definitely needs to break. It needs to fall, and we need to rebuild. There's no question. We need to continue to search for the root causes and try and resolve them there. I wanted to just take pause also to just acknowledge how many people, many on this call, many not on this call, who are not allowed to speak right now. And I think you spoke to that, Mo, and I think it's really important that we just acknowledge how challenging this point in time is for so many people who are not in a position to talk, to speak, to share what's actually going on. And I'm so grateful for this safe space that we create at Giving Women, where we can have these conversations, because they're difficult conversations to have. So thank you so much, Mo, for reminding us about the challenges there, but also for bringing us into this next phase, and to remind us that there's a lot going wrong here, and there's a lot of suffering, and we really need to acknowledge all of that, but there's also an opportunity. And I think now I'm going to turn to Phyllis. Thank you so much for being with us as well, to take us into this next chapter. And could you please introduce yourself, Phyllis, and tell me what you believe the historical problem with the system is, but more particularly, and why INGOs, NGOs, and national agendas are not enough to localize collaborations, and to create collaborations. And what is it that you are currently working on to actually solve the problems in the short term, and also to think about more systemic solutions? Thank you so much for being with us, Phyllis.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be on this call with everybody. Thanks for joining. And my name is Phyllis Costanza, and I work at an asset management firm called Advanced Portfolio Management. And we're starting a new division called Social Investment Solutions, and we're creating solutions across the social impact and financial return spectrum. And I've been working in the nonprofit and social sector for the majority of my career. And there are a lot of systemic challenges that we've seen, and I don't think any of this is going to be new to you. But these long-standing structural challenges include, inefficiencies in funding distribution, tensions between political neutrality and ethical accountability, and a lot of systemic barriers to local leadership, which is quite critical right now. So if you think about INGOs, you've got brain drain from government to INGOs, which has really weakened community resilience in the global South. And, a lot of coordination failures one example, look at the World Food Program and the flawed logistics in Yemen, where food has rotted in warehouses while people starve. And, we're seeing that right now, as Felix described, in sub-Saharan Africa as well. Localization deficits. In 2016, and I'm sure well before this, there was a grand bargain pledge, which was launched at the World Humanitarian Summit, which aimed to direct 25% of humanitarian funding to local actors by 2020. And 2 years later, only 1.2% reached local organizations. And, there's been a misallocation of resources, poor accountability. Another example is the International Conference for Support to Lebanon, which was many years ago. And, substantial funding was committed. And by 2024, 78% of that funding was dispersed, and yet only 22% of the reform promises were realized. And then the last example with the SDGs, look at where we are with the SDGs, and tragically, I expect it's going to be worse. When they were first launched, Deloitte came out with some estimates on what it would cost to achieve them. We will have spent hundreds and hundreds times more than what was anticipated. And at least last year, we were on target to achieve by 2030 only 12% of those goals. And perhaps that number is going to decline based on recent cuts. So what are the solutions? They're obvious from the challenges. We need direct funding reforms to make sure that we are supporting local organizations. We need to prioritize frontline responders, women-led organizations in the communities in which we're working. And yeah, it's really hard to do that when you can't say the word woman. Capacity building is going to be increasingly critical. And how do you build capacity of local organizations to deliver? And I think we'll see a lot of funding, and I hope we'll see funding shifting towards that. I think that in light of these cuts, we're going to see a lot more requests on accountability, and including things like localization targets, but in terms of impact as well for organizations providing short-term solutions, so direct services. There'll be a lot more requests, I believe, to show evidence of impact. And the good news around that is that there are a lot of really exciting new AI solutions to help track the impact, help do reporting in a really low-cost environment. So I think we're going to have to see a lot more shifting from the social sector into new technologies. And I don't think we're seeing enough of that right now. But that could be a very low-cost way to increase accountability. A shift in power dynamics is going to be required to see a lot more funding to, away from the INGOs and to local groups that will increasingly demand autonomy. And also, the last thing that I think is really important is redefining success metrics. We have been so focused on short-term outcomes that we have not been open. I was a funder for 25 years, and very rarely did we look at a metric that could be achieved 10 or 15 years down the line. And the way philanthropy works is that we like to consider ourselves risk capital. So we like to support really risky concepts. And once they've been proven, we step away. And so we never are able to scale these solutions. And I think we have to take a hard look at ourselves and think about how we're funding and the types of support that we're giving in the future.
Thank you, Phyllis. I wonder if you want to, well, maybe I'll go to, I wonder if you want to just go straight right into some of the the opportunities that you see and when what you're currently working on and the solutions that you're offering to the system today, just as the short,
Sure.
that would be great to hear from you.
Sure. So there's a big opportunity with for particularly wealth managers. So right now, only 5% of wealth advisors are comfortable talking about philanthropic or impact solutions with their clients. And yet 91% of wealthy clients expect their wealth manager to talk about this. And there's a lot of money that we could get off the sidelines if we can unlock that potential. And so what we're doing is building the technology that enables wealth advisors to really confidently offer solutions to their clients so they can fund along that impact and financial return spectrum. Some may only be interested in solutions that deliver a financial return. And there are so many great local opportunities to fund social enterprises that are delivering tremendous impact. And then philanthropically, how do people find the most impactful organizations in a rural part of a community that they might be interested in? And so we'll be building the technology, again, using AI to structure what has been very unstructured information about impact so that wealthy clients are able now to direct more resources towards some of these really impactful programs. And I think there is a big opportunity now using technology to be able to offer these solutions. One other thing we're doing, I don't know if you want me to talk about the Foreign Aid Bridge Fund now, or should I hold that till later? Should I? Okay. So for those of you who are unaware, a number of people have gotten together to launch something called the Foreign Aid Bridge Fund, and you can find them. I'll put the website in the chat. And what we're doing is providing, this is a Band-Aid. I want to be really clear. So I talked about structural changes that are needed, and we're providing a Band-Aid for organizations that are providing life-saving services so that we can get them to the next stage. So we're looking at organizations, number one, that are providing life-saving, two, that have a sustainable funding ecosystem so that they just need money to get to the next point where they have funding committed or they have a diversified funding base. So for those of you who might qualify for funding from this, I will put the website, and there's an application process to apply. Or for those of you who are interested in donating, we're also raising money also to be able to provide this funding. Thank you.
So Nidhi, I wanted to come back to you. We talked briefly about the waivers, and I think the waivers is one opportunity to try and overcome. Now it seems, since we had our initial conversation, that the situation has kind of solidified. So I'd just like to turn to you to kind of hear more about your thoughts on what some of the solutions are today, and where you see the reimagining of the system as we go forward, and just give you an opportunity to share some of your reflections on that.
Thank you. So the waivers being referenced, there were two sets of waivers announced at the beginning of February by the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, which outlined at a high level programs largely funded by USAID that would be exempt from the funding freeze. And those included initially some programs that were part of PEPFAR, so HIV/AIDS work, not fully, but a subset, and some select activities in other areas of health, as well as humanitarian assistance. The revised waiver was a little more expansive in that it clarified some areas of work in HIV to include testing and treatment for all populations, which was critical because prior to that, there was what was not included were services for LGBTQI populations. And then some support for PrEP, which, for those of you who don't know, PrEP is a drug that essentially can prevent the risk of contracting HIV in high-risk individuals. But PrEP is only included for pregnant and lactating women to minimize risk to their children. So it is not included our LGBTQI populations, who we know typically are in the high at-risk categories. It also expanded to include some areas of tuberculosis, malaria, some core areas of maternal child health, and some areas of outbreak response. But what I would note are two things. One is the dismantling within USAID that I previously spoke about has directly impacted what's happening then on the outside. So the issues of the fact that the waivers became just words on paper, the money was not actually moving out of USAID. And of course, there was continuous terminations, so no of staff. So then no look to say, if we're trying to exempt these program areas, who are the people that would be critical to make sure that support happens. And in addition to that, what we've seen is that the US government is just not a reliable partner. I mean, that's the overall impact that, aside from, of course, the fact that the services have stopped. So the ripple effect that has had on partner organizations has been not just that partner organizations are doing layoffs, it has jeopardized partners in being in violation of local law, employment law, because every country has different law that permits how much notice you're supposed to give employees or required to give employees before termination. And with no funding in the pipeline, many partners have been in positions of having to do immediate unplanned layoffs in substantial numbers. It has also jeopardized the ability of partners to get lines of credit because many countries are not viewing a line of credit from the US government as an assurance anymore, given had the ripple effect of what this has happened. So it has not just the impact on immediate services, it threatens the lifeline of organizations to actually sustain going forward. And that's why I think you see a lot of organizations having a moment of not just looking at layoffs, pause, or stopping of programs, but potentially fully shutting down because they might not actually be able to continue or stay afloat or go through some kind of restructuring. I would also note there are people in the US government who have said that there have been no interruption of services for programs that are included in the waiver, and that is not true. That is completely false. I think we've seen now the fact that partner organizations have sued the US government and actually have found court rulings in their favor, finding that the US government is in violation of contract law as proof of the fact that the money is not coming out. We've seen since, because of some of the court actions in the last week or so, a little bit of movement on payments, but it is really not substantial in terms of getting to what partner organizations are rightfully owned. And this interruption period is what I want to talk about, because even if there's an interest or an intent, and an intent might be generous in this scenario, but let's say there is an intent to actually turn some programs back on, the fact that there has been a pause is what is so damaging and what makes it so hard to turn on, because you can't just get people and systems back in place when it's been slashed and burned on all sides. And on the service delivery side, the whole pipeline has already been backlogged in the sense of pausing of procurement orders, pausing of the ability to hire staff, shutting down clinics for people who might actually come in for services. I mean, that damage has been done. And the types of activities that were in theory included, even in these waivers, even though some have received a little bit of funding, but most have really not, did not include anything that are more holistic system investments. And this is the point that I really want to drill in, because when we talk about a Band-Aid approach, which is needed, in the current moment, we will continuously be doing a Band-Aid approach if we don't actually invest in systems. And USAID is the only part of the US government that has a full systems view. That is, as the premier development agency of the US government, that was the ethos of the agency is centered around building capacity while also dealing with acute needs. So that capacity aspect, in looking at kind of a systems investment in the long run, there's no plan to continue any of that work. It is included in the 83% of programs that have been announced to be terminated. We also see a complete dissolve of the US government's operational capacity. So to actually deploy experts, response teams for outbreaks, this is what's happening right now for Ebola in Uganda, which is an active outbreak. My former team, which would have normally deployed, has been the very few people left. So what we're seeing is the real ripple effect in things that are preventable problems that are growing. And then on the flip side, you're seeing announcements yesterday from the Secretary of State about the intention to move what will be preserved of USAID's programs into the State Department. And the State Department is a diplomatic agency, not a grant-making agency. USAID was a grant-making agency. So they don't have the capacity internally to do what it is that USAID did, and that will take time, which I note because that will likely present another gap even if there is a list of programs released that these programs in theory would continue, or there's an appropriation that preserves some part of foreign assistance, we are going to see a repeated problem in probably the near future of not being able to actually facilitate money getting out of the US government, because this Department of State is just not set up to do that at the scale that USAID was, because that hasn't been their mandate. I mean, that's just not what the agency has done. But while it seems like a grim time, and it is, I mean, there are, I think, a few opportunities that I would just note. One is, it is, I think, really critical to think of both the realization that the US government cannot and should not be depended on or seen as reliable in any form in the near future. And this will go beyond a 4-year period. Even if in 4 years there is a different perspective on foreign assistance, the legislative process that will need to unfold in the US to facilitate an increase in foreign assistance will take quite a long time. And what that means is it's an opportunity for actors in the system to think of not just this bridge period that we know is so critical, but what does a restructuring of the system actually need to look like so that the system serves people first and foremost in a way that does not put them in a position of potentially having what they rely on just kind of yanked away. And that more holistic think, I think, does bring in the question of different types of actors to provide funding resources than perhaps we've thought of to date. We know that philanthropy cannot compensate for what we are seeing in a reduction of government funding. And it's not just the US, even though that's substantial. We've seen a rapid reduction, an announcement of reductions of foreign assistance across the UK and Europe, with a large shift to support defense funding to support Ukraine, which we saw a few years ago as well, right? So, I mean, we've seen this movie over and over again, and it's time we really learn from that, as opposed to let this process repeat every few years. And I think have to really think of the realities of what can and should come to the table in terms of resources, but then also how is it that we can support governments in looking at domestic financing commitments, of what they prioritize, and use that as a way to align how resources come in to support a country. And this is where one of the biggest mistakes I think we make in global health is only talking to ministers of health, but we need to have conversations with ministers of health and ministers of finance to understand country priorities and their plan and goals for domestic financing and how to increase that, so that as we look at a broader system view of how to bring in different types of resources, non-traditional actors in terms of funding, it can really be centered in what countries are determining as their priority.
Thank you so much, Nidhi. That's so helpful. There's so much in that. I wanted to just kind of drill into a couple of things. One being, as a funder, like there's a couple of things that I've heard being slightly innovative from the philanthropic space in this particular time. We try to react quickly often, and one thing that I've heard about is certain foundations putting money up to help organizations to close. So, as you mentioned, like many are not going to survive, but closing is actually an expensive undertaking, and there's a lot at stake there, and individuals and organizations are really could really benefit from a certain amount of cash to be able to do that job. The other one is around really trying to find more efficiency within the system and actually offering money for mergers. So where there isn't enough money to keep both of the organizations open, let's come together and let's fund this merger. And that does cost money to get, everything aligned, the legal, the values, the systems, everything. So these are two innovations that I thought were quite if you have the possibility to adjust your strategies and to bring capital to this transition, I think these are two that I found to be very innovative. I think the other thing I'd like to just point out, and what Nidhi's saying here, is also just being cognizant of this call for localization, but also of empowerment of governments to say, we often in the development landscape, we're funding organizations who are working, but they're working within a system, and there's too many actors not working collaboratively to enable the change that's necessary. And aligning ourselves with the local governments, giving them and leaving the space for them to actually make the policies and attract also the taxation that's required to be able to do their jobs is really critical. And I think we've maybe been remiss in some of the work that we've done in crowding out government in some instances, and I just wanted to sort of put a note on that. The time is slipping away from us, and there's so much to talk about. So I think I'm going to come to Heba next and ask you to really elaborate a little bit more on what you're working on and what your vision for a post-aid world is, and how can this moment of crisis be an opportunity to really to build back better? What is the vision that you're bringing? Thank you.
Sure. And just to refer back to some of what has been said, I mean, you said the system needs to fall. I think it is important to recognize that the system is helping millions of people, but that it is a very flawed system and that there might be better systems out there. And so we can hold kind of both of those things at the same time. And so some of, I guess, my thoughts build on Mo's very compelling and inspiring case for what's wrong with the system. So what we have been doing in our dialogue series is, and it is called Donors in a Post-Aid World, on the assumption not that aid is going to end tomorrow, but that aid has reached kind of peak legitimacy and peak finance. And so what can we imagine as a future paradigm? And sorry, this is a bit more conceptual than some of what we've heard at a very concrete level, that could in the long term replace aid as we know it. And our vision, at least myself and my colleague at ODI that are working on this, is that ultimately you might sunset the whole idea of official development assistance and replace it with something else. So over the course of our discussions, 3 policy priorities have emerged as really necessary as we think about the future of aid. One is that this pot of money should really be used to help the most vulnerable. So to the extent aid continues to exist, it needs to refocus. And here we've had really interesting conversations on how this particular moment of crisis can be an opportunity, in that as the money shrinks, people are going to have to prioritize. And so to really identify criteria upon which to decide what to protect can force that kind of thought process. And that will require aid agencies to be honest about the parts of the system that aren't working or that aren't as necessary. And I'm not sure we've seen that yet. But as you said, Elianna, there are efficiencies to be had in the system, particularly at the UN level and in the multilateral organizations. And I've heard some of the donors saying, like, why do we need to have a UN AIDS, a UN FPA, a UN Women, a WHO, a Global Fund, a Gavi? Some of this you could start to see mergers make sense, and that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. The second priority we have identified in these conversations is that in addition to aid that's going to help the most vulnerable, we do need a different kind of pot of money for global public goods. So things like fighting climate change, pandemics, migration, and that these are 2 different purposes. And in that sense, there's a really interesting idea emerging called global public investment. And that is the idea that instead of having aid being channeled from rich countries to poor countries, all countries would contribute to a common pot of money from which all countries would draw down as needed. And so this idea, again, has predated the most recent crisis as a more a less patronizing way of thinking about the way we cooperate at an international level, and just a reflection of the reality that we have global challenges that we all need to work together on. But it can also be very relevant in this current moment when you have a Trump administration talking about free riding, et cetera, that instead of framing things as aid, you stop using the word donor and you frame it as, we're all contributing. And actually, if you, America, don't contribute, you are the free rider. And so you can start to change the framing of things in this moment in a way that can actually drive the change that many wanted to see anyway. And then the last priority we have been focused on, and it's come up a bit today, is what we call structural transformation. So rather than giving aid, how do you address the drivers of inequality that make countries in need of aid in the first place? And actually the benefit, so this is something that has long been demanded, particularly by countries on the receiving end of aid. But right now, again, there's a kind of window of opportunity because this doesn't actually require millions of dollars in aid money. It requires changes in policy. And so, for example, countries are in massive debt and paying more in debt than they are in education and public services. If you change the debt policy, you can actually unlock tons of money without paying anything in aid. Trade policies that are super extractive and that make it much harder for countries in Africa to trade at the same level as countries in Europe. Tax policies that allow money to be taken offshore illicitly and deprive countries of money they could use to help their own citizens. So all of these things are areas in which now government donors that are cutting on the aid side are thinking, what can we do on this policy side that could actually contribute? And in so doing would help this kind of structural transformation that we're talking about. So I think amid the very real suffering, there are opportunities here. And then the last thing I'll say, and it's been mentioned again on localization, is I have heard, and in one of the dialogues we held, people from Africa saying, actually, we're less worried about this USAID cuts than you donors are, because maybe it's finally an opportunity for our governments to take ownership over helping our own people. And we never again want to be in a situation where one crazy man can cut off the healthcare of an entire continent. So what do we do to get out of that state of dependency? That's kind of our vision of a post-aid world, if I can stop there.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we will share information about this in the mail out going out after this call. And thank you, Heba, for drawing our attention to all of that that really optimistic work. Actually, as things are closing down in some areas, we are opening up new opportunities in others. So we're running out of time. I would like to invite Felix. We haven't heard from you for a while, and I'd love to hear from you a little bit more on what the solutions you think the solutions are in this context, and how you're navigating complexity and uncertainty today. You talked about finding the funders that you need to be able to continue to do your work, but what else do you see, and what opportunities are there?
Thanks. I just wanted to echo what Heba said about the dependency. So when I was out there, obviously collecting voices from the field, it wasn't just voices from the last mile. It was middle income families and government officials, and it was the whole spectrum. And I heard a lot of people from Ethiopia, from Tanzania, and from Kenya saying that maybe this is a wake-up call. Maybe we I heard somebody said, we had a good run. We had a lot of free lunches there for a while. It's time for us to get to work. And there was a sense of pride that they could solve their own problems, and the solution can be localized. And so in that spirit, I mean, my organization, Sanku, has always had that idea that it should be market-based, it should be local, it should be run by the people and hire from the communities that you're trying to help. And we've definitely done that. So I think one opportunity for organizations, or definitely social enterprise, if you have the luxury, is to create an alternative revenue source. And not to be completely dependent on philanthropy, and definitely not what we call big aid. And so if you have some sort of ability to sell something or create a revenue stream, whether it's directly to the private sector or through the government, that will offset, again, that dependency for that NGO or for that social enterprise. And we've definitely achieved that as an organization. The other thing is government ownership. I think a lot of the projects can be run through the government and should be run through the government. I'll use an example, testing and creating key nutrients. I mean, these are things that labs could be set up and owned by the government, and factories could be partially owned by the government. So I think those are opportunities to not only localize, but to maybe share the responsibility, to create a little bit of sustainability and accountability at the local system. And then, again, the dependency on what I call big aid or government or institutional aid, that seems to be getting a lot more riskier. And I think, people are following suit. So, my advice would be find really good foundations. And there's foundations run by really good people. And we luckily have some even in Geneva, Pictet Group Foundation, Rolex. There's also organizations coming up with great gap filling or emergency funding, the Life You Can Save, a Founders Pledge. There's a lot of people stepping up, and more people than you probably realize. And so I think the money is still there. It just needs to be released. And to the point, I forget who said it, go directly to the most needed, to the people who are suffering or are not having the access to basic human rights. I think we can be a little bit more responsible of where that money goes to be most effective. And so I started off earlier talking about the problem, but I feel a lot of hope. I think as a community we can get through this, and I will leave today definitely feeling a lot better about the situation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mercy, I wanted to ask you if there's any advice that you wanted to give to local organizations and grassroots organizations. What would you say to them today? How can you bring hope? Where are the solutions?
Yeah, definitely. To all of us, to all our women, we should not lose our self-confidence. First, we have to have the real self-confidence in us that we will not be taken at any time. And another thing, when it comes to the economic thing, we were providing economic independence for our women. So we have to have our own economic independence, as now our friend told, without depending on anyone. And we have already started that process. We are making women, we are changing women as entrepreneurs to do business, to earn for themselves. That is the next option. And as you said in the beginning, we are seeing all adversity to opportunities. So now we have for which we need to have really self-confidence. So we are going to proceed with that. We are not going to, let our women down, and no one is going to lose anything if we have very good self-confidence, and we will be financially independent by becoming entrepreneurs. And of course, we need some capacity building still, and we need more informations, and which all these forums like Giving Women, this forum gives us. So we are really very happy, and we want more information and self-reliant and self-sufficient. That is what Giving Women has taught from the beginning. So I'm proud of that. This particular event is giving me more power, confidence, self-esteem, everything. So I'm not alone here. I'm not alone here. So many women from all over the world are with us.
Wonderful.
So thank you for
so
the good
much,
opportunity.
Mercy. And I think you echoed the words of Felix about the self-reliance, and I think this is absolutely also where, when I'm speaking with our partners at the foundation, I'm constantly saying, you also can't depend on even foundations. When you think they're moving in one direction, sometimes the direction changes, and the only thing that is actually going to sustain long-term the work that needs to be done is actually the self-reliance of organizations. And I think that Phyllis spoke nicely to that today, and some really wonderful opportunities that are there. But I do agree that it's really important to create the systems that need to be sustained on the ground, make them sustainable, make them self-sustaining, and that means integrating into government or finding economic systems that work. Mo, I want to come to you for some enlightenment and some solutions as well. Please share with us what your vision is.
I so appreciate this conversation, and I love that it's multi-level. I wanted to touch on a few points. One, every functioning society needs three sectors: the public, the private, and civil society sector. And you've demonstrated that with the people that are here on the panel. Definitely, we have to address systemic change with the notion that healing is required as we go forward. We cannot abandon people who are suffering today because we're trying to reform a system. None of us here would have reformed these systems and cultures of aid and research in this manner, but here we are. One thing that I really want to impress upon us is that we need more than self-sufficiency. This is also an outdated model. We need solidarity. We need community. We need to reach out and understand that we are not in a competitive environment where we're just vying for dollars or yen or whatever currency we're using. We need to make sure that community is centered, not just this notion, this hyper focus on individuals. And so if there's a way that we can reach out, if there is a way that this public, private, civil societies, if they can bring each other to account, it's really important for us not to accidentally replace a non-functioning or corporate system of government with private money that is not accountable to anybody. So one of the ways that development aid reform and, for example, research go together is both require accountability, both require us to hold people in positions of power to account for the harms that they cause society so that we can address those consequences. We didn't have ethics in research until after the atrocities of World War II, when we started to realize that people were committing harm in the name of science. We can't do that. This is a new space for us, understanding the ethical conversations that we have to have in order to talk about the world that we want, which means no one gets harmed, which means everyone has the right to flourish. So keep that in mind. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for making a perfect segue onto the next thing, which is, as a community, and I'm first, before I go anywhere, I just want to thank all the speakers. You guys are fabulous, and you are doing such incredible thinking and doing, and this is so essential right now. And I think what Mo reminded us is that we also have to always constantly remind ourselves to do the feeling as well. And I think that's really critical in this crisis that we're in. And so I wanted to offer a couple of opportunities. We'll send out in the follow-up email, but we will be doing a convening by Giving Women. I believe we said the 9th of, is that right? 9th of April at lunchtime.
Oh, sorry, 9th, yes.
Yes. So this is really just kind of bringing together whoever feels they need to be there, but to share insights, to share, to be in solidarity with one another as we cross this complex terrain and as we imagine another world. There's going to be countless other opportunities that we will share in the emails that have been shared today. But this is one that Giving Women is going to offer to its community to come together, share insights, share support, share what we're seeing, and share ideas about how we can really support one another and really focus on what's important in this complex time. Create some principles also about how we go forward, which I think are really critical because it is complex and there's many ways, many complex decisions that need to be made. There's also the Sandoz Family Foundation, which is doing a convening of foundations to also talk about where do we go from here, and we will be sharing a link for anyone who wants to sign up. I should have remembered the date, and I don't. We will be in the email, but it's coming up very shortly. And I didn't leave any time for any questions or comments or anything really. Perhaps I just give each of the speakers one opportunity just to say 2 words in closing. And I wanted to thank everyone else for being here. Unless there's someone in the crowd who absolutely needs to speak, and then I'll just unmute yourself and speak now. Okay, so I'm going to give each of the speakers 1 minute to just close their conversation. Starting with Mercy. Is Mercy?
As I said in the beginning, we are going to change from adversity to opportunity and look for other options, not to depend on only one donor or one support. People are there around the world to support us, to support the people. Thank you for this good opportunity.
Thank you so much. And Phyllis, what's your call to action?
My call to action as well, what happened has been, it's done in an incredibly cruel way. We do need to look at this as an opportunity. And somebody talked about how consolidation. Let's start looking for partners we can work with, because we can no longer go it alone.
Thank you so much. Felix.
Yeah, I think I have hope if we accept this is the reality we live in now. And so moving forward, we have to move forward in a different direction. So I have hope that if everyone's thinking that way, we're going to be creative, we're going to be innovative, we're definitely going to be strong.
Thank you. Nidhi, over to you.
Thank you. This unfolding, I think, has been a forced reckoning for the global health community of what has worked and what has not worked. And there are, of course, a lot of organizations that are not that are changing not by choice, but there are also some organizations that need to make the choice to change. And I think this is very much a time to for all organizations, the large multilaterals, the small community-based ones, everything in between, to really think about how we walk the talk when we talk about locally led interventions, development, and services. And if you want to give space to others at the table, sometimes that means you have to reevaluate the space you take up and maybe give your chair to someone else. And I would really encourage organizations to have that thinking while they deal with kind of all the balls that are flying at them in different directions.
Thank you. Over to you, Heba.
Oh, I would just say that I'm thinking of all of those on the ground who are doing the hard work. Mercy, Felix, thanks for everything that you do. And we're all in solidarity with you, but also that it's really energizing in a sense to see people coming together and trying to respond to this in creative and like kind ways. So just power to all of us as we do that.
Wonderful. And Mo, over to you.
The arc of history bends towards justice, and the way that we implement that is to reach out. Go talk to your neighbor. Do you know your neighbor? Let's talk to each other. Let's volunteer. Let's act in solidarity and not just hope for solidarity. We got this. We can do it. We're so much more powerful than they make us think we are.
Thank you so, so much. Yes, I'm deeply moved by everything that was shared today, and so humbled also by the power of this community to come together and to in spite of how incredibly challenging things are today, finding hope. And I'm leaving this conversation with a lot of hope. And so thank you so, so much, everyone, for being with us. And I apologize sincerely for not having given you a chance to ask questions. I promise to do better next time.